Hey guys, Stealth here. In this deck review, I'm reviewing a deck which was sent in by Jimmyisback. He's asking me to have a look at this deck and point out the weaknesses of it, how he can improve it, and if I can do some gameplay with it. Well, Jimmy, I might be able to do some gameplay later, but for now let's just have a look at the deck as it is. He states that it is meant for heavy pushes into the enemy line in 10v10 battles. So with that in mind, he's doing a heavy push. I'm not entirely sure what he means by that, but possibly armored, and that he is using it for 10v10s. So the first thing that we notice here is that in logistics he does not have a fob. And that makes this deck extremely mobile. It makes it so that it doesn't have a main base, if you will, whereas the normal fob in a 2v2 or 3v3 and even some 10v10s is what you could call the main base. He has commando infantry, or command infantry I should say, in Mi-28 TVs. I'm not sure why he picked the TV over the K-29, because the Ka-29 is a little faster than the Mi-28. Especially if you're trying to capture some terrain early on, especially those forward reinforcement points. An Mi-28 with its 270 kph is going to get there fast, but the Ka-29 is going to get there faster at 270 kph. So I would switch out these guys and get them back in, but then in the Ka-29. Next he has one command BMD 2K. This is also an amphibious unit, but there is not that much water on most 10v10 maps, and when I'm thinking 10v10 I'm thinking the large maps, so Asgard and Gaul, stuff like that. Not the smaller maps which are usually designed for 3v3 or 4v4 but which are used for 10v10s, there's a difference. He also has one card of Mi-26s and then 9 Urals. It depends on how mobile you want to make this deck. It depends on what kind of units he has in support, but I'm not sure Urals are the best way to go then. Sure, they're mobile and they can get into a town, but if he's going to focus this general deck towards armor, then maybe it would be better to bring a card of Mi-6, where you get 3 choppers and that way you don't have to micromanage that many supplies. The weakness of it is that you don't have that many recon vehicles, so losing one of them is going to have a pretty big impact on your unit's logistics tab. So in this situation I'm not entirely sure, and that's why I'm going to leave it with the Ural for 4320. Infantry wise, we got a bit of everything here. VDVs transported in Mi-8s, Igla Ns transported in Mi-8Ts, Spetsnaz, Mi-24Ds, and then some Motostrelki and BMP-1D. It depends on where on the map he's going to be operating, but looking at this, I would not pick the BMD-1 or the BMP-1D. I'm a big fan of the BMP-3. Those Arcan missiles are extremely deadly and hit well above their 35 points if you can get them on target of, say, a 50 or 60 point tank. They can even kill stuff which is way heavier than that, but even killing a 60 point tank means that you already earned this thing twice almost. So very effective. They are, however, very expensive. They're 35 points, so that makes your infantry a lot more pricey. And unfortunately the standard Motostrelki don't have access to it. It wasn't in service back then. So you gotta use BMP-3s with Motostrelki 90, which makes your infantry 5 points more expensive. So it's really a trade-off of where you want to go with these guys. The BMP-1Ds are a good option if you're going into a town. But since this is a general deck used for heavy pushes into the enemy line, I also use it for 10v10. I'm not entirely sure if this is the right vehicle, but I cannot make any recommendation based on what he spec'd as the mission profile. Because a heavy push could mean anything. It could mean pushing through a town, using a combination of Motostrelki, BMP-1Ds and Spetsnaz. It could also mean trying to push over a large open area and trying to get there quickly with the Mi-24Ds, the Mi-8 TVs and the BMP-1Ds. So it's very hard to make a recommendation based on this. But the one card that I'm not seeing in here is one which is ATGM. So there is no long-range ATGM infantry in here, while the Russians do have some of that in the form of the Concours, the Factoria or the Concours M. With that in mind, I'm going to switch out the Motostrelki and the BMP 1D and switch them in for Motostrelki 90s. Now I know that severely limits the amount of infantry that you can bring in, but it does get you 9 BMPs, and that does offer you quite a bit of anti-tank capability. So with that I'm going to take them at the lowest veterancy, and with that you have a bit more of these guys. He also has 11 VDV-90s. I'm a big fan of the VDV-90s with their RPG-29 Vampire. And of course they got very decent anti-infantry capability. These guys are airlifted in Mi-8 TVs, which have their rocket pods with them. So those can also be used to suppress infantry and destroy some light vehicles, but nothing too heavy. It depends again on how you want to use these guys. If you want to deploy them in urban areas, a chopper could use in an early land grab. But if you want to do a land grab later on, a chopper might not be safe to arrive there. And you could, for example, take the VDV-90s in the BMD-3 if you wanted to. Because the BMD-3 has some very nice anti-tank weapon in the form of the Conqueror's M and the 2A42 autocannon. So it really, again, depends on what kind of mission profile you got for these guys. But for now, since I'm not entirely 100% on that, I'm going to leave them in the Mi-28 TV. The Igla Ns are a good choice, and he's taken these at train, so he has 7 of them. They have a good base accuracy of 55. Their range isn't stellar of 2450, but it's still good enough to take down most helicopters. And then finally there's Spetsnaz. Not a lot I would change. You could say that you could get the Mi-24A instead of the D and save yourself 10 points. But for 10 points you do get a helicopter which is not faster but heavily armed. It gets the Yak-B versus the NSVT machine gun. It gets the same amount of rocket pods, but it gets the Fleita ATGM instead of the Falanga. Now the Falanga isn't great, but the Fleita is just a little better. In support, let's see what we have here. We got 6 Tors, 9 Beryuzas, 4 Tungushkas and 4 Nonas. So this very well suits his playstyle of not having a fall, because Nonas don't need to be resupplied very often. And if you can get 4 of these guys onto the battlefield, you can provide support for pretty much anything. So this entire deck is geared towards mobility by the looks of it. 4 Tungushkas, these are the very good but expensive Tungushka Ms, which have the SAMs on them. The other Tungushkas have these as well, but they get a slightly lesser version of that missile. Tungushka M can still shoot down helicopters at a range of 3.3 kilometers even if the main gun is disabled. These guys have a range of 2975. So it depends on personal preference if you want to have the Tungushka M or the main Tungushka. Tungushka M gives you 3 and 4 units for 100 points, and this is the same availability. So I suppose you could say that it doesn't really matter, and for 15 points you might as well get the better SAM on this thing. Then he has 9 Beryuzas. These are probably there to support the Tungushkas, and I think 9 of these is a good addition to his battle group, because you don't know what you're going to do if you have a helicopter battle group against you. So an air assaulter using a lot of helicopters is going to be meeting these ZSU-23-4MZ's Beryuzas, and they're quickly going to decimate those choppers, especially if you combine them with a couple of Tungushkas. So I wouldn't change anything here. 6 Tors though is a bit much. I know that they can do both. They can do both helicopter and airplane warfare, but since he already has a very solid anti-helicopter setup with the Tungushkas and the Beryuzas, I would not go with 6 Tors. I would instead go with 4 Tors at the lower veterancy as a sort of all-rounder, and then one which is dedicated purely towards anti-air in the form of anti-airplanes. For example, the 9K37 Buck M1. And I would bring 4 of those. Because this way you got your anti-helicopter, you got an all-rounder, a helicopter / airplanes, and you got Bucks. So you can have a very nice ring of anti-air. In tanks we got the T-62, T-64, T-72BU, T-72 1989 and the T-64 BVI. Let's see, these are probably his meat grinders. They also come with the Arcan, which makes them hit well above their points of 65. 21 AP power, 50% accuracy, so you can expect these things to hit about 2 or 3 out of 4. He's taking these at 13, so that means trained, so they get a little accuracy bonus, but not that much. And this is probably the meat of his tank force. Not a lot I would change here. You could decide to go with a lower version of the T62M. If you compare this, for example, to the T62M1, you're going to see that it has a little bit less armor, but it also has, it lacks the ATGM. Some people like the ATGM, some don't. Having them means you got more anti-tank capability than you would get from the main gun. Not having them means you get 4 more rounds, and that you get to you relieve a little of the supply demand which this tank would put on your supply helicopters, because those Arcan ATGMs are expensive supply-wise. So you could go with the T62s, but I think that this is a solid choice. The only problem that I have with the whole T62 line is their low rate of fire. 6 rounds a minute is not great. Then he has the T64BM. Again, 9 of these. And combined with the BVIs, these are both very, very solid tanks. BVI has, of course, no ATGM, but a very, very powerful cannon. 19 AP power, good rate of fire. This is 50% better than the T62 line, and that makes it a lot more capable to fight against other vehicles. And the T64BM has the Cobra. Now the Cobra is not as good as it is on the Arcan on the T62, so finding a middle ground would be ideal. So he already has this one. You could go with the T64BV, because that gives you an Agona. It has a little bit more AT power, but it's also a lot more expensive than what he has in here. So, seeing as it's a nice middle ground with a Cobra and a good tank, gun, a good armor, not a lot I would change here. T72BU has super heavy hitters. 180 point tank, of course, 22 frontal armor, a very, very solid gun on it. Not as well stabilized as some of the NATO guns, but the Sphere is very, very capable as well of going through enemy armor, so even on the move they can fire both of these weapons and do a lot of damage. Just keep in mind you only get 2 of those, so be very, very careful and micromanage them. You could go with the the T80UM. There's always a slight difference between the 2 of them. You see that the T80UM for 5 points less got 2 points less armor, which is very, very significant. It does, however, travel at a higher speed. Its accuracy is a little better, and it comes with the Ingvar ATGM, which does slightly better accuracy and more AP power damage than the Sphere on the T72BU. Rate of fire on these tanks is the same. They use exactly the same weapon. But the stabilizer on this one is 5% better. Otherwise, it's pretty much exactly the same tank. The difference is autonomy. This one has a medium size, so does this one. Stealth is poor on both of these. So the main difference is that this one hits a little harder than this one, but it goes at the cost of armor. The T72 1989. This is going to be probably escorting a T72BU or functioning as a main push. It carries the same 2A46M that we find on pretty much all of the higher end Soviet tanks, and I have used these things somewhat. I'm a bigger fan of the T72S, but of course you don't get those in this deck. I think it's a good choice. You could say that the gap between 100 and actually there is no gap. He has 120, 150, 180, and then on the lower end 95, 65. So he has a good spread of his tanks. T64 BVI I already mentioned. This is a very solid tank. I think it looks great. It's a very, very nice vehicle. Heavily armored with explosive reactive armor, as you can see there on the sides and the turret. Doesn't do anything in game, it just adds a little bit of extra armor, and it has 17 frontal armor, which means that this thing can defend itself very, very well against other tanks. Recon tab, 4 units, 1 recon helicopter, another recon helicopter in the KA-52. I think this is too many helicopters. You could say that having 3 of these is enough and having 7 of these is redundant. So I would not bring one of those. I would instead bring something that is very, very, very sneaky in the form of the Spetsnaz VMF, because these guys can sneak up a lot closer to the enemy than the Razvedkas. Razvedkas got good stealth, these guys got exceptional stealth. So that is why I would bring 1 card of Razvedkas, and you can decide to bring them in an Mi-24D, or you could go with the Ka-29TB, which is a bit cheaper. So let's bring them in that helicopter. Then he has Razvedkas, which are pretty much spread out all over the map as passive recon, except that he has 9 of those, which I think is too many. I would go with 7, especially if you're doing a 10v10, where you're operating in a medium to smallish area. You don't need 9 infantry recon, especially now that you have the Spetsnaz VMF in there. And then he has 13 T-55s. I think this is too many again. And I would switch those back to 9 tanks, because I've never gone through 9 recon tanks. So I think that 13 is even more redundant. Vehicle-wise, we got the BMP-T, pretty much a must-have in any kind of deck that is Soviet-wise. And he got the TO-55 Napalmer. There are a lot of nice vehicles in the vehicle tab for the Soviet Union. You got the BTR-90, which is very, very nice to have. Norovs may not have that great specs, but for 35 points they are very cost effective. The Buratino, but the Buratino will put a lot of demand on his already not so many supplies. So I agree with not taking the Buratino, although we have 57 out of 60 points, so we could revisit any of these tabs later and spend some more. But with this he has anti-infantry capability and more anti-infantry capability. The anti-tank capability seems to be provided by the tanks themselves with their ATGMs mounted on them, and my change here with the BMP-3s, which also got the Arcans. So he should have more than enough anti-tank weaponry. And that means that he doesn't really need to bring in a Concourse, BTR-90 or a Sturm. Helicopters, we got 3 Mi-24Vs. These are the ones armed with Igla SAMs, which are technically not SAMs in this case, but air-to-air missiles, since they're mounted on a helicopter platform. And then Mi-28s. So this is also some more anti-vehicle capability, especially geared towards anti-tank on the Mi-28 and anti-air on the Mi-24V. There's always the comparison of the Mi-28 versus the Akula. Akula can do both, so if you want to have a little bit more multi-role capability, you could go with the Akula and even more boost your anti-tank capability. The difference is that the Vicar has 26 AP power and these have 22. Other than that, they carry the Igla, where the Mi-28 carries the rocket pods. So it depends on your personal preference. In the air tab we got the MiG-25BM. This is the seaplane, you only get one of those. Always nice to have a seaplane in your deck, you never know when you're going to need one. I always consider if I'm using a lot of helicopters, if I'm using a lot of flying material from the planes tab. If not, then you don't always need a seaplane. If you just have an air superiority fighter or 2 and the rest is, say, geared towards armored warfare, then you may not need a seaplane, but having one is nice to have in a deck. There are other seaplanes which are in this deck, or which are available in the sense of the Mi-24, but the MiG-25BM has more range, better accuracy, and due to its higher veterancy, it is more likely to hit, especially since that 65% is boosted even further. Combine that with 50% ECM versus 20%, and the MiG-25BM is very, very solid anti-radar plane. Next, he has the Mi-25. Let me switch this back to select all. Mi-25, the Su-25T. This one is the anti-tank one. 26 AP power on 16 of these Vickers. You can see them hanging under the wings, and 2 Vimpels. So if shit really hits the fan, you can use these air-to-air missiles to try and take down some planes, or if there's a helicopter operating in the same area, this thing, well, sometimes it gets a lucky hit. It's a solid anti-tank plane, but again it depends on what kind of push you want to make, if these things are useful or not. Then he has two Su-27S. There's the eternal discussion of what is better, 2 trained or 1 elite, and the answer is always, as in Wargame, well, that depends. It depends on whether you're doing a 10v10 tactical, where 1 Su-27S would be better than having 2 at trained. But if you're doing a general 10v10, which is not geared toward tactical, then having 2 of these is very nice. But especially if you fly them out together, they can take care of pretty much any aircraft. Finally, he has the Su-24M in here. I'm a big fan of this bomber because it is extremely effective with 30 of these 250 kilogram bombs. It does have some ECM, travels at a good speed, and this is just a solid bomber. Let's see if he has anything in naval. It seems that he does, but he hasn't finished it looks like. So he has 8 Motostrelki in the BMP-3, combining both infantry capability with high-end ATGMs, or high-end AT weaponry with ATGMs, 1 Utiloi and 4 Hujians. I would add here, depending on the type of battle that you're doing again, some, let's see, Jiang U3s. These guys are extremely effective, whether they're pounding shores, defending themselves against anti-ship missiles, taking down helicopters. I think that these are some of the most cost-effective ships. And since he has a fleet mostly geared towards ships, I would also bring a supply ship, just because those things can gun out of ammo. So 3 Munas. Now that does leave us with some points to spend. We can spend 3 activation points. You don't always have to spend everything, but it's better that you do. And now you can decide whether you want to spend them on infantry logistics, more recon, more vehicles, or more helos. And at this point I usually just browse through my deck and see and pretty much check off from a checklist, do I have everything? Do I have enough infantry if I want to engage a town? More or less. We got VDVs, Motostrelkis and Spetsnaz. So another card of infantry would be nice. Enough AA is definitely checkmarked, because we got all of the Tungushkas, the Bryuzas, the Taurs and the Books. We got plenty of anti-tank capability. We got plenty of recon in here. So the anti-tank capability or miscellaneous capability provided by the vehicle could be interesting. Another helicopter could make this deck a bit more flexible. But I think that for now the best category to pick those 3 activation points would be in infantry. And then of course we got the huge shopping list for the USSR, and it depends again on what kind of battle you're playing. Since I'm a big fan of the VDVs, I could go for these guys, the VDV-90s in BMD-3s. You could also go with the standard VDVs, which are slightly less expensive, but they get a RPG which is significantly worse than this one. You could say, well, I want to have a bit more AA in there, so you could go with any of the AA lines, but I would recommend the standard Iglas. Or you could go with ATGM infantry. Although we have ATGMs mounted on the Su-25T in air, we have them on helicopters, we have them on tanks, so we don't really need them in here. And that means you could just spam some more infantry, you could go with more Skyas. It depends on the deck. If I'm looking at this deck and I'm looking at what kind of capability I would want to have in a town, or actually in a 10v10 with a deck like this, you could go anywhere. You could go to the middle and try to secure the town. You could go through the outskirts where you have your tanks operating. If you're going towards the outskirts, I would bring a vehicle, and especially for town warfare in the middle of the map, he doesn't have enough infantry. So let's say that the deck is geared towards open, pretty semi-urban combat. That means that I would want to take some more VDVs. And let's bring those in, let's say the BMD-2 maybe. Yeah, the 2 or the 3. You lose 2 VDVs, but you get the Concourse or the Concourse M. Thing is, we have plenty of AT capability, so we don't need the BMD3, as good as it might be. Let's go with the Scratch Ads and bring 11 VDVs in that, because the Scratch Ads can also give some AA capability. It's not great, but it adds a little bit. And that completes the deck for 60 out of 60 points. Again, it's a general deck with a mission profile that was not entirely clear to me. So please, if you have any other additions or any other thoughts on this deck, leave those in the comments below. If you want me to have a look at your deck, just send me your deck through the link in the description and I'll have a look at it. I do get quite a number of these decks every day, so I might not get around to having a look at your deck. If I don't, I'll send you an email if you leave your email address with it, and I'll give you some feedback that way. If you have a friend who can profit from this video, who can benefit from it, I should say, please send them this video. I'm looking to expand my channel even further and I need you guys' help for that. So please recommend this video, share it with your friends, and let's all help me grow this channel. If you like this video, please hit like, and if you want to see more of them, subscribe to the channel. For now, thanks for watching and see you next video.